Stephen, always good to see you from your Lego bunker. I wanted to get your reaction to this because you had worked, and for people who don't know, Stephen had worked in the Bush White House, and you were there advising former VP Dick Cheney on foreign policy. Tell us a little bit, when you have these electedly, you the president or vice president of the United States making very important speeches on international stages, like what Biden did in Warsaw. We were talking about whether or not some of his stuff seemed ad-libbed, or whether they thought this was a good thing to say before, and then when they saw the international community's reaction, realized that maybe it wasn't, and so sent out the fixers. What is this process when people are putting together a speech like this that references so much significant foreign policy positions? How does that go? And do you think that this was more than a misstep?
Well, I think it's more than a misstep because we basically have someone running with scissors without permission. He's just out there ad-libbing all the time. In a normal process, and maybe they even had a normal process and it was just tossed to the side, there would be weeks of buildup to this. There would be pre-meetings and meetings within meetings. There would be all kinds of coordinating and editing on the basic elements of the remarks. Obviously, the president is commander-in-chief and can make policy on the fly if he so chooses. And sometimes presidential swagger or ad-libbing or keeping our competitors or enemies on their toes is a positive thing. But it needs to sort of be controlled chaos. It can't just be chaos and people starting to think, oh, this person just doesn't know what they're thinking or saying. And when you have more explanations than declarations, you're basically officially lost. And so our enemies are not afraid. They're not actually confused. They're just ignoring us and doing whatever they're going to do. Our allies are the ones that are left confused, wondering what they need to do to try to work with each other or try to resuscitate American credibility. That's essentially the problem here. You know, people wanted to criticize former President Trump for being a disruptor. President Bush had a little bit of Texas swagger, would be more blunt than people ready for every once in a while. Might not have had the most brilliant sentences every time the boat went out to sea. But with every one of those messages, people did have a clear idea of what the intent was. And if there was any cleanup, it was kind of expanding on what the president meant, not replacing or correcting what the president meant most of the time. So, as you know, we are a month plus into a war. This is not a place where you kind of go up and do your stand-up comic routine and try to kind of work your way through the audience and have some give and take with reporters or diplomats. This is where you really need to be rock solid and clear, and Joe Biden's the opposite of that.
Yeah, because some of the stuff he said, there were people wondering, is he trying to talk his way into World War III?
That's been a real weird head scratcher through this entire exercise, because there have been many, many opportunities for on-ramps for this conflict. Before there was an invasion, there seemed like there were contours of an agreement that we might get stuck with anyway, but it would have been without thousands and thousands, millions of people displaced, just uncounted assets destroyed, people's lives that obviously never come back. And so there's just been lots of opportunities to take an off-ramp from this conflict. I can only think it's been kind of the Europe-centric focus of our establishment. I think, intoxication with divisive and I think delusional politics that led them into this Russia trap, where now they've talked up this war to end all worlds, and now they seem intent on pushing. Nothing more provocative than the president going and saying that the leader of a big country with nuclear weapons cannot stay in office. Lots of people will wonder what that means, but I think everyone does know what that means. Now the question is, what do you think you're going to do about it?
That's the big $1 million question, talking with Stephen Yates, Senior Fellow at America First Policy Institute. I was reading this great piece, Neil Ferguson, who was discussing kind of this weird strategy. Everything's always about this strategic ambiguity, whether it's with Taiwan or even Ukraine and NATO, and strategic ambiguity with how to deal with Russia. I mean, he doesn't come out and say it, but that's, the result of that. That's ultimately what's implied by this op-ed. But he made an interesting point, saying that the administration is making a colossal mistake in thinking that it can protract this war in Ukraine, bleed Russia dry, and topple Putin while signaling to China to keep its hands off Taiwan. I don't see all of that. That's not going to happen. It's not going to be a 1, 2, 3 fell swoop. I don't see that as being a workable strategy. But it seems like that's what they're doing, though, or that's what they're choreographing.
Well, I don't write excellent academic articles or write brilliant op-eds these days, but that seemed to be 2 or 3 more plates spinning than this commander-in-chief is capable of carrying. Yeah. And so we're not going to have a situation where anyone is going to be carrying out a protracted campaign on any issue of the day. Think of it. We have had a border crisis. We have had a budget crisis. We have had a health crisis. We have had national security crises. Over and over and over, we have had crisis after crisis. We're building another crisis on a potential deal with Iran. And then we're told that Taiwan is next and China's on the march. So their plate is already full. There is no strategery going on in this. We basically have the blind leading the blind, going from event to event, hoping that they can kind of walk through this as a comms exercise. But now with the president as key spokesman, the comms aren't working either. And so we're having to fall back on, well, what are we really prepared to do? And now it seems like we're going to be forced into having to have some kind of a deal with Russia to end the conflict. And probably Zelensky will call it a win, but is it really a win when you lose territory and you lose lives of your fellow countrymen? And do you really have a verifiable security guarantee going forward, even if there's a pause in the war? I think it's just a very, very dangerous precedent that was set, and it's horrible for deterrence in the Middle East and Asia and anywhere else. But that's what cards we've been dealt. So I'm hoping that everyone besides the president and the White House can kind of pull up their working boots and get out there and build up deterrence in these other theaters with the allies that still trust us and work with us.
Yeah, I'm talking with our good friend Stephen Yates. Last quick thing here for you. I saw this. This was an interesting headline just because Ken Salazar, these government creatures, they get in there and they stay in there. Ken Salazar, I think one of his kids was over at Bureau of Land Management. Salazar was like Department of Interior at some point. So now he's U.S. ambassador to Mexico. And he is displeased that members of these Mexican political parties are establishing this Mexico-Russia friendship group. And he said that this is not the time to show support for Russia because of Putin's invasion into Ukraine and all of this. And he was saying that this Mexico-Russia relationship can never happen. I get the sense that Mexican leadership, current leadership, and this administration are not friends. I mean, I think it would be kind of an abuse of that word to ever describe it as that any of their leadership being friends with any president. But it seems that Biden hasn't done himself any favors to endear himself to Mexican leadership now. How much of a worry is this? You and I have talked about Chinese involvement in South America, Latin America, and the very real threat, perhaps biggest that this faces. But I'm just curious as to why Salazar would bring this up, especially considering the undue attention it would put once again on the border that I know Biden wants to keep the spotlight off of.
Well, this should be, as that infamous Silicon Valley guy said, below his line. He has lots and lots of other priorities, like a porous border, like drug cartels, like all kinds of terrible things flowing into our country by way of that geography. We have good people in Mexico that can make a fantastic partner of the United States, where we wouldn't have to be outsourcing all of our manufacturing to the communist slave labor camps of the People's Republic of China, if we found a way to get things right in our hemisphere. And while I don't think Russia under its current leadership is good, that's a problem with that government and not necessarily their people. But what is bewildering is these Democrats that are willing to go to the mat on one issue and one country alone. And it seems to be Russia. And it's just bizarre that all these other threats mean literally nothing to them. So our ambassador to Mexico, yeah, Russia should be on the list, but it should be like item 10 or above on a list of priorities of where American people's interests are at stake in Mexico.
Yeah, there you have it. Stephen Yates, always good to see you. Hope you feel better.
My pleasure,
I know you're
Dana.
fighting
Thank
with
you.
a cold. Good to see you as always. Take care. Thanks so much.